The courtroom was packed, buzzing with low murmurs as Pam Bondi stepped in, her confident gaze sweeping over the audience. She had handled countless high-stakes cases, but today felt different, charged, almost hostile. As she approached the plaintiff's table, she caught a glimpse of Judge Howard Gates, sitting with a smug look plastered on his face. His reputation preceded him, arrogant, ruthless, and fiercely protective of his allies. Pam knew this wasn't going to be a fair trial. The case was simple, but explosive. A wealthy businessman accused of embezzling state funds, using political influence to cover his tracks. Bondi had prepared meticulously, gathering irrefutable evidence. But the moment she started presenting her opening statement, Judge Gates cut her off, barely glancing her way. "Miss Bondi," he drawled, tapping his gavel lightly. "If you're planning to bore this court with your theatrics, I'd suggest skipping to the part where you admit your incompetence." A few chuckles erupted from the defense side, and Pam felt the heat rise in her cheeks. But she remained composed. "Your Honor," she replied firmly, "the evidence clearly indicates—" "Evidence?" Gates interrupted, scoffing. "I've seen better stories written by interns. Are you sure you didn't fabricate half of it just to gain attention?" The audience whispered in shock. Pam held her ground, refusing to let him shake her. But something didn't add up. Why was the judge so hostile from the start? It felt personal, almost calculated. Pam's instincts screamed that there was more to this than just the case. Pam tightened her grip on the stack of documents, forcing herself to stay calm. She had faced intimidation before, but this felt deliberately orchestrated. Judge Gates leaned back, smirking as if he'd already made up his mind. Pam took a steady breath and pushed forward, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. "Your Honor," she continued, her voice unwavering, "the evidence I have here clearly outlines the misuse of public funds. These financial records—" Gates waved a dismissive hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Miss Bondi, save us the lecture. I don't need a legal dissertation on your baseless accusations. Move on to something relevant, or I'll consider this a waste of the court's time." A murmur rippled through the gallery, and Pam noticed the defense attorney barely suppressing a smirk. It was almost as if Gates and the defense were working in unison, both intent on discrediting her. That thought planted a seed of suspicion deep in her mind. Was Gates deliberately sabotaging the case? Pam straightened her posture, refusing to back down. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I request permission to present Exhibit A, bank records obtained legally through a court order, which clearly show unauthorized transfers to the defendant's private accounts." Before she could continue, Gates slammed his gavel down with a loud bang. "Enough! I will not tolerate this circus. Miss Bondi, if you insist on dragging this out with your fabricated nonsense, I'll hold you in contempt." Pam's heart pounded, but she remained stoic, meeting his gaze with steely determination. In that brief moment, she noticed something odd, a flicker of anxiety in Gates's eyes. Why was he so desperate to shut her down? Her instincts told her that he wasn't just protecting the defendant. He was protecting himself. Gates cleared his throat and glanced around the room, as if suddenly aware of the growing tension among the spectators. Reporters leaned forward, sensing that something deeper was unraveling. Pam decided to change her strategy, knowing she needed to shake him up. "Your Honor," she spoke with a calm, deliberate tone, "it almost seems like you're trying to suppress evidence rather than examine it. Is there a reason you're so eager to dismiss facts without hearing them out?" The courtroom fell silent. Gates froze, his jaw tightening. For the first time, his confident demeanor wavered. He opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated, glancing nervously at the defense attorney, whose smug expression had now vanished. Pam kept her eyes locked on the judge, watching his reaction closely. She knew she had hit a nerve. Something bigger was at play, and she wasn't about to back down until she exposed it. Judge Gates cleared his throat, struggling to regain his composure. "Miss Bondi," he snapped, his voice laced with forced authority, You are dangerously close to crossing a line. I suggest you tread carefully." Pam didn't flinch. Her gaze locked onto his. The room was so quiet that even the slightest shuffle echoed. She knew Gates was trying to intimidate her into backing off, but she wasn't about to let him control the narrative. She needed to dig deeper and expose the root of his hostility. "Your Honor," she said, a calculated calmness in her voice. "The public has a right to know how their tax dollars are being used. The defendant's financial transactions have been linked to multiple shell companies, some of which have direct ties to key political figures. If this court refuses to address such blatant corruption, it undermines the very foundation of justice." A ripple of tension swept through the room, and Gates's face darkened, his jaw clenching tightly. He leaned forward, his voice dangerously low. "Miss Bondi, I will not have you grandstanding in my courtroom. You're clearly out of your depth and wasting this court's time." Pam could sense his desperation, and that's when it hit her. Gates wasn't just protecting the defendant. He was protecting himself. Her mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Could it be that Gates was somehow involved in the financial web she was unraveling? Suddenly, one of her assistants, Sarah, subtly signaled from the prosecution table, sliding a document towards her. Pam glanced down and froze, her eyes widening. It was a recently uncovered file detailing suspicious financial transactions linked directly to Judge Gates' personal accounts. Transfers made shortly after the defendant's project approvals. Pam steadied herself, knowing this was the breakthrough she needed. She picked up the document and held it up confidently. "Your Honor, I have just been handed new evidence. Bank statements directly linking you to unauthorized transactions connected to the defendant's financial operations." The room erupted with gasps and whispers, and Gates's face went pale. His hand gripping the edge of his bench so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The defense attorney shot to his feet, his voice trembling. "Objection! This is outrageous!" But Pam didn't back down. This document clearly shows that Judge Gates received significant payments through the same shell companies tied to the defendant. "I'm moving to file a formal motion for your recusal, Your Honor, due to a direct conflict of interest and corruption." Gates pounded the gavel furiously, his face contorted in rage. "Enough! This hearing is adjourned. Bailiff, remove her from my courtroom." But no one moved. The bailiff remained rooted to his spot, unsure of what to do. Pam knew she had cracked the facade. The judge's authority had crumbled, and the entire courtroom could see it. Reporters were already on their phones typing furiously. Gates shot up from his seat, pointing at Pam with a shaking finger. "You will regret this, Miss Bondi. You've made a powerful enemy today." Pam didn't break eye contact. "The only enemy here is corruption. And I promise you, Your Honor, it's not going to win today." Before Gates could respond, the courtroom doors burst open, and two federal agents stepped in, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The tension in the room became almost tangible as they made their way to the front, their eyes locked on Judge Gates. One of the agents, a stern-looking woman with a commanding presence, addressed the courtroom. "Judge Howard Gates, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of judicial power." Gates' face went ashen, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of his bench. "This is absurd!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You can't arrest me. I'm a sitting judge." The agent didn't waver. "No one is above the law, Your Honor. Please step down from the bench." The defense attorney looked panicked, frantically whispering to his client, who now appeared just as shaken. The wealthy developer's smug demeanor had completely vanished, replaced with visible fear. Pam stayed composed, but inside, she felt a surge of triumph. She hadn't just exposed corruption, she had shattered an entire network of power and deceit. Gates made one last desperate attempt to assert his authority, pointing at Pam as the agents approached him. "This is your doing! You think you can ruin me?" You'll pay for this. Pam stood her ground, her voice calm and unyielding. Justice ruined you, Judge. You did this to yourself. The agent closest to Gates pulled out a pair of handcuffs and gestured for him to turn around. Gates hesitated, eyes darting to the reporters snapping pictures and filming the spectacle. Finally, he relented, his shoulders slumping as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The once formidable judge was now just another criminal, caught in his own web of lies. As they escorted Gates out of the courtroom, Pam allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Reporters swarmed her, shouting questions, but she remained poised, addressing the room with quiet confidence. This case was never just about one corrupt developer or one compromised judge, Pam stated firmly. It was about accountability and ensuring that those in power are held to the same standards as everyone else. No one is above the law. The courtroom erupted in applause, even from some of the jurors who couldn't help but feel relieved that justice had finally prevailed. The defense attorney slumped into his chair, realizing that his case was now irreparably damaged. The developer, his face pale and sweating, knew his days of evading justice were numbered. As Pam gathered her documents, Sarah approached, a proud smile on her face. "You did it," she whispered. Pam gave a small nod, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Uncovering the truth meant exposing more corruption than she had ever imagined. The fight wasn't over, but this victory was a crucial step forward. Walking out of the courtroom, Pam could feel the eyes of the public on her, not just as a prosecutor, but as a symbol of justice refusing to back down, no matter the opposition. She knew that this moment would resonate far beyond the walls of that courtroom. And as she stepped into the sunlight, she couldn't help but smile, because today, justice had won.